The Wisconsin Music Educators Association proudly presents a Jazz Educators Rhythm Section Mini Clinic, taped entirely on location at the Indian Head Arts Center in Shell Lake. In the next 60 minutes, you will learn techniques and methods vital to solid jazz education. 4 master performers will share their ideas and experiences in building a jazz rhythm section. Frank Dawson, Stu Mueller, and Brad Williams, all professional jazz musicians and teachers from Chicago, along with Ron Kieser from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, have teamed together to give you an in-depth look into the vital role their section plays in the beginning jazz ensemble.
What's one of the things about the rhythm section that's kind of unique, say in a big band, as a section? I would say probably the most unique thing is the fact that you have 3 or 4 different instruments, if you're talking about a guitar, in addition to piano, bass, and drums. And yet they're all different instruments, although they're related instruments. It's not the same thing as a trumpet section where you have 4 or 5 people playing exactly the same instrument. Or even a saxophone section where the instruments are slightly different, but basically they're all very closely related. In the rhythm section, you have the drums, which are basically playing non-tonal, not notes, but just percussion kind of sounds, right? And then you have the bass, which is in a whole limited range, very specific kind of technique. Guitar is related to the bass, if there's a guitar. And then you have a piano. And they all have very specific roles within the rhythm section. One of the things to realize about jazz and jazz education, in my opinion, is the fact that jazz originally evolved out of professional musicians playing extremely long hours for years and years, and through all the proficiency that they developed, they started spontaneously adding to the music. Now, when you talk about jazz education, you're talking about taking young people who are basically learning music, and you're asking them to do what originally was a product of very experienced musicians getting bored, knowing everything cold, and getting bored and elaborating. So it's kind of it's a funny backtracking kind of thing, particularly in the rhythm section, because of the fact that you have so little to deal with. I know you look at your charts in your big bands and your combos, and all you have are chord symbols, maybe a melody, maybe sometimes you have voicings written out through the chart, but normally you just have one set of voicings. So every time you play the chart, you have to play basically the same voicings. You don't have that freedom until you know how to make up your own voicings. All right? And that leads to the next level, not only the technical proficiency of a bass player or a drummer being able to sit there for 10 minutes and maintain a tempo with some kind of animation, or a bass player being able to sit there and play note after note. I was telling him that I have a friend who's a saxophone player, a professional saxophone player. He told me one day, he said, I had this terrible nightmare last night. He said, I dreamed that I was a bass player, and I had to play every single beat of every single song. So if you think about that, just the demands that makes on the bass player to come up with a note on every beat, at least for the pianist, and I'll get into that more specifically when I talk specifically about the piano, you don't have to play all the time. There's that option not to play. But in the other, like the drums and the bass, they have to continue playing constantly. And that for the educators and the directors, that is an incredibly big demand to make, even on a somewhat professional musician, needless to say, an amateur musician, or someone that's learning. Beyond that, gets into what I was saying a minute ago about the genesis of jazz, which is people getting bored with things sounding simple or being just a basic melody or a basic preservation of a tune. There's a lot to add to that basic thing, requires a lot of theoretical knowledge, as you're all finding out, here, as we all throw these circle of fifths at you and key signatures and scales and chord constructions. Those kind of things requires a certain amount of sophistication too. So this whole thing gets into a very high level kind of expectations on people. It's not something like marching band or something where you can basically teach someone a routine, a basic routine. They follow through with it. You know, it's very cut and dry. This is creative. This is like painting. This is like any kind of creative act. All right, and you have to have the materials, but then you also have to have the freedom to be creative.
One, two, one, two, three, four.
The freedom to be creative. Let's listen as our clinicians discuss the role of their instruments in the rhythm section.
Third and seventh thing happening all the time. Okay, yeah. And it's like, you know, so basically what's happening, it was like, you know, Stu then becomes my seventh string. And instead of actually, it was like all this heavy, what makes that thing work? I'm very, very low volume-wise, but what makes it so strong is I'm just sitting on the thirds and the sevenths, and the two of them coupled with the drum, you know, that gives a real strong, resilient swing feel.
Everybody's together, and
Yes.
everybody's got the beat.
Yeah.
But it's not light. I mean, it's not heavy. It's like everything's real nice and light. You know, get this bouncing ball effect. And that's what defined what the swing thing was. And it's almost a lost art.
Especially on the downbeats of the measures.
Yes.
Downbeats of the measures, I'm playing roots or very closely related chord tones, like probably the fifth. The only other chord tone I might play on the downbeat of the measure might be the fifth. Certainly you play the root of the chord when the chord changes. So to define the chord change, it must be the root of the chord. Plus, when you're doing this kind of thing with the guitar, when the guitar is playing the bassy 4 to a bar swing feel like that, then I have to be a little more simple with the bass line so that it doesn't conflict with the guitar voicings. Because we essentially become one instrument, and I play like he said, the seventh string or the bottom string on what essentially would be a big 7-string guitar.
Okay, I just play the basic time beat. Ding, 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 ding. With the hi-hat on 2 and 4. Occasionally I'll throw in a little pop on the snare drum and a bass drum. Very light. Second chorus, I added in the clicks. 1, 2, 3, click. 1, 2, 3, click. But very, very light. Light stick with a plastic tip. Seems to work the best for clarity.
Okay, basically what they did was like right at the end of the Second World War, or possibly toward the end of the Second World War, you know, the bebop element came into being. And then, even though Basie's band still worked off of that rhythm section, what happened in New York at that point meant that the timekeeping element, instead of being, it's like, you know, in fact, I don't know whether the Basie drummer used his bass drum all the time, but then the timekeeping thing was just the bass player's right hand and the drummer's right hand. It was like, and possibly the hi-hat happening, which left the drummer's left hand free for kicks and bombs, etc., etc. And then what the guitar player basically became exactly the same thing as the left hand of a piano player. They did not directly state the time. Okay. Could we do the changes to, so the confirmation, change to confirmation? Sure. But, okay, it's basically the same type of thing because Bud Powell would just play then on the bottom end, he would just play just thirds and sevenths, but instead of directly stating the time, because the guitar player and the piano player then basically were aiming at the same direction. Okay, and let's run this confirmation, say about, just the changes to confirmation, that's what I mean. But 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. this bit. Hear the interplay? Okay, now what's left to see now is that because I wasn't directly stating the time, Ronnie was playing a figure, boom, tum, tum, tum. It was like, and I started meshing with it because then the music, especially within the rhythm section, became very conversational between everybody. It was like, down those two is freer to run different substitutions, and luckily I'll be able to catch them all, it's like, and vice versa or something, and Ronnie, instead of directly stating the time, no, his left hand is free. He was playing different rhythms over there. I could match him, work with him. So there's much more conversational things happening now, which means that the ear, when you're playing, comes much more into play. Directly stating the time. Stu was sustaining notes, and I wasn't actually playing staccato. It was like a marcato, where I was actually sustaining the chords just enough, stopping the vibration, but not making them too long, so that there's a resilience to the beat. It was like, and Stu was actually walking through, sustaining the tones. Give me a couple of measures. Sure. 1, 2, 3, 4. See, he's sustaining. I'm stopping the quarter notes right before the next beginning of the next pulse. And what that does, that gave the resilience especially to the basic rhythm section.
Of course, the most important thing is to gain exposure by listening to the real thing. Because there's no way that it can be taught in a completely dry form as a method. It has to have that ineffable kind of hard to define factor. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to provide or obtain, the student should obtain or the teacher should provide some resources, things like fake books, which stimulate the curiosity of the student as far as figuring out chords and knowing what to do.
Well, the first thing you've got to do is turn his volume down, and that's phase number 1. Phase number 2, it was like, I'm just talking about just the straight ahead nuts and bolts handling of the instrument. Number 1, dealing with books like Mel Bay's orchestral chord system, which deals primarily with drop 3 inversions, drop 2 inversions on the Johnny Smith method, and locking on every possible inversion of those chords comfortably up and down the neck, learning every possible physical fingering of every major scales, all your primary elements, your major scales, dominants, mixolydians, Dorians, and things of that nature. Get them absolutely locked in before. This is what I say, because this is what I try to do with my people over in Chicago. Get all those techniques as locked in as much as possible, and then listen. Because basically the music it's an oral tradition. It has to be taught. There's no way on God's green earth that you can put it on paper. It has to be taught by oral means. They have to hear it, and especially in my case, I demonstrate it as much as possible. And it's like, because it's, the jazz tradition is basically oral. Because no way they can put it down on paper. It must be taught that way.
Yeah, I would say that there are three things that a person has to do to be a good bass player. First and foremost, the most important role of the bass player is to provide solid rhythmic foundation for the band. Is absolutely the most important thing is to provide a good, strong pulse, one that is even, one that moves forward in direction, and one that is just very solid. And it can't be tentative. It has to be very confident, very authoritative, and very deliberate. So rhythm, the rhythmic pulse. Number two, a good bass player has to know the harmonic content of the music. It's just part of the language. It's just like speaking a language. If you don't know the words and the grammatic structure and the way people speak in a certain language, it's difficult to communicate. Jazz is the same way. It has its own language. So you must learn the language. And to do that, you got to learn scales and arpeggios and harmonic, the harmonic content of the music. So number one, rhythmic, a strong rhythmic pulse. Number two, a strong harmonic sense and understanding to develop good walking lines. And number three, listen to recordings of jazz by the jazz masters. As has been said here before, it's the only real way to fully understand what it's all about. It can't be written down exactly like it sounds. It has to be listened to and assimilated in that way.
Okay, the drummer. First of all, find 3 other good rhythm section players like this, and then you'll sound a lot better. No, I'm just kidding. Time. You got to have time. First and foremost, 90% of the things you do are time and style. You have to know all the different styles, rock, Latin styles, jazz, all the variations of jazz styles, all the variations of Latin styles. And then when you get that down, do a lot of listening, live concerts, CDs, tapes, videos, anything you can do to get your knowledge broadened. Ensure that you play musically. Drummers have a tendency to play loud, louder, and loudest, and that doesn't make it. So put it all together in practical application, do a lot of jobs, do a lot of gigging. You'll learn more by that than probably anything else.
No, B flat. That's right. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Frank Dawson emphasizes a strong theoretical and historical approach to teaching jazz guitar.
Copy that Basie style because in my estimation, Basie, that band with Freddie Green on the guitar, that's what really defined the swing feel. Now, think back to 1935. Of course, some of us weren't there in 1935. But the object of the game is, the bass, they weren't amplified. It was acoustic. No disrespect intended. Okay. And I think it was like Pops Foster was one of the first ones to actually sustain the notes on things. But the majority of the bass players used a real short, that short choppy sound, because I'm sure the action right around the first position was this high. So the sound of the bass was real short, real short. And the pre-Max Roach drummers used to use that steady 4/4 bassing. It was like, of course, not like they do today, but it was like, it was a little bit subtle, but they still use that 4 thing, so it was, that sort of stuff, So what's happening is they had energy, there was energy to the pulse, but as great as Benny's band was, what happened was Basie, when Freddie Green played the guitar, in fact, oh God, I wish I had your bass here. But anyway, when Freddie played the guitar, he was, just running. He was running his chords so that the bass player was always playing the root, or the varied versions of the chord, etc. But what Freddie was working with the bass player so that the bass player was basically Freddie's seventh string. Those kind of charts almost invariably will be indicated as such. Now, it's like they'll have, okay, you do the basic style. So you know that the kid will be able to do that. It was like it's when he makes the strum, it's a quarter note, which is a little bit longer cap sound. It's not staccato. I think the closest way would be like marcato. In other words, like it would be short and fat, as opposed to. You don't want that. He wants it just a little bit long. It's like the closest legitimate sound would be like a marcato. Kind of hard. I have to get into my top on Andrews bag here. So you can hear the bass line. Hear the bass line? All he's doing is voicing the third and the seventh on that chord. If the piano player is strong and he can voice all those extensions and make them real pretty and real nice, if the guitar player wants to play those same chords and those same extensions, they must work together, work on their inverted. There was like, if the piano player is going to play a minor ninth, the guitar player is going to play a minor ninth, they must work on that so they can be all preset. In other words, like you probably have to have rhythm section rehearsal to do that. If they are not going to do that, you let the piano player play all the extensions on top, and let the guitar player play nothing but the sevenths and the thirds. I'll run like, say like an F blues. See, just like Freddie, but instead of directly stating the time, using irregular rhythmic irregular comping rhythms. Good morning, Frank. What do I need coffee? This way, there's no danger of the piano player playing a flat nine and the guitar player playing a natural nine, and it's like, which is, it's great if you're into blue cheese, great in salad, but not in music. Okay, I'm not sure how to name blue cheese. But the object of the game is if the guitar player then deals with nothing but the third and seventh of the chord. And you hear how I'm really not just like, and it's going to be very strong because you're sitting on the essence of what the harmony is. Or just friends, key left. Just working with the third and seventh. But I'm also playing the guitar player's part with my fingers. There is irregular, there's no directly stated time, and he's voicing nothing but the thirds and the sevenths right there. Now, the roles can be reversed. If you are blessed with a guitar player who is serious and is a harmony freak like we all are supposed to be, then you let the guitar player deal with the thirds and all those sevenths and all those extensions, and you let the piano player do the Bud Powell thing where he's playing nothing but roots, fifths, and thirds and sevenths. If
to get the thing happening, if there are, it's like if they both instruments are going to be playing the same chord, full chord, they must work out in front what the inversions are, what extensions they're using, because if you don't, it's going to be a train wreck. My recommendations for listening to jazz guitar, the way it's supposed to be sounded, would be Wes Montgomery. You know, it's like, you know, he's one of my favorites, because everything that he played with his thumb can be, you know, that's his octave sound, etc. And if they are into the sequence of events for electric guitar, Charlie Christian was the first, and he was the most important because he was one that opened up, and he was light years ahead of everybody in that Goodman Sextet. You've got the Benny Goodman Sextet with Charlie Christian playing guitar. Pick up those records, and you'll listen, you'll hear them. Georgie Auld and Sweets Edison, all these people were like wonderful swing players, real strong, and then all of a sudden Charlie Christian comes in and he's playing pentatonics, minor 6, 9, 13ths, and augmented 11ths, and all these other stuff over top of the. And then there's Charlie. It was like a splash of cold water, like a time warp, like somebody flashed him down from the 25th century and just threw him in his 1940 groove. I mean, that's how much of a difference it was. It's important for the guitar player to hear what he was doing. And remember now, when you tell these kids about it, tell them they can't listen to those historic things in the same light of 1990. It was like, because, the guitar, I mean, the kids that they're working, the things that they're working on now with the guitar, they just open up the techniques blindingly. But anyway, you tell them that they can't listen to it in the light of 1990. You have to listen to it in a historical perspective, and then it'll start making sense to them. Immediately from Charlie Christian, I would suggest Barney Kessel, Tal Farlow, Jimmy Rainey, for the for the bop-idiom players. But my favorite, post-bop player is Wes Montgomery. It's like,
Solid time, knowledge of harmony, and listening summarize Stu Miller's philosophy of teaching the bass.
The better you do your job, the better the other people will be allowed to do their job. All right? You have to do your job as a bass player, which first of all means playing with a good rhythmic feel. All right? You have to be the pulse. You have to set up the swing. Sometimes tunes start with just the bass player and nobody else, right? So when that happens, or sometimes it's a drummer or sometimes somebody else, but when it's a bass player, you have to do just what everybody else does and play with good time and a good feel and play a good groove, all right? I used to say you got to have great time all the time, but now I don't use that term so much as I used to. I mean, you still have to practice with metronome, and you still have to get real regular and solid and be able to play with the beat. But even more importantly is to play what feels like a good groove, okay? That's what makes people want to dance. And that's what, you know, you have to do as a bass player. We'll talk a lot about good time and playing with a good group, all right? Because that is the most important thing. It's better than your choice of notes. It's more important than your choice of notes. What notes you play, what scales you play. It has to feel good, all right? You can get away with playing a few wrong notes here and there. I hope we don't have to play too many. But you can get away with playing wrong notes before you can get away with playing bad time. Okay? You have to play good time. Okay, so number 2, now comes the notes. Have a well-constructed bass line based on the chord progression. All right, so you can do that several ways. You can use a chordal approach, you can use a scalar approach, chromatic or passing tone approach, or a rhythmic variation complementary to the musical style. So just take each one of those separately. First of all, you can play with a chordal approach, outlining chords, arpeggios. All right, so if we're playing, let's see, okay, if we're playing the first few bars of a blues, all right, F blues, a chordal approach would sound maybe something like, okay, where I'm just outlining the chord. F major, B flat 7, and then is an F6 chord, or an F major triad with one note added. Okay, so the chordal approach. You can use a scalar approach, which is just following the major scale, or whatever mode you're playing, Dorian mode, Mixolydian mode. Okay, so first 3 notes of an F major scale, and then the second chord, B flat, a Mixolydian mode coming to which is a dominant 7 mode. It's the same as a major scale with a flat 7. Those are the first 4 notes coming down from the B flat Mixolydian scale. So scalar approaches, chordal approaches. The third one, a chromatic or passing tone approach, which is probably one of the easiest ways to get around almost any chord changes, just to play chromatically. Okay, so I didn't move except the space of a perfect 4 from F flat. But I used a little more than just the scale. I used some passing tones. A flat, up to B flat, and then coming down from B flat to F, F sharp to F, right? Right? So now you can use, so there's those 3 different things. Now, the most ideal thing is to use a combination of all those things. A chordal, scalar, and chromatic approach, right? Okay? We'll take a lot closer look at all this stuff, right? I'm just kind of going through it real fast now. Okay, D, a rhythmic variation complementary to the musical style. Last night, for example, we played a tune called Rythm, a Joe Henderson tune, which has a Latin feel, all right? So you can't play, in most situations, playing a Latin tune or straight 8th tune. You don't play walking bass lines like you do in swing tunes or jazz tunes. You play something that probably most often is representative of the figure that looks like dotted quarter, 8th note, dotted quarter, 8th note. And harmonically, it's even much more simple than trying to play walking bass lines, because in that tune last night, Rythm, I just played roots and fifths almost for the whole tune. A few passing tones here and there, you know, chromatically a half step above or below the note I was going to, but mostly roots and fifths. Okay, so. That's the first half of the tune. All right, 2 chords, 4 notes. All right, and the rest of the tune. Okay, so that was the second half of the tune is almost entirely a circle of fifths, where you go up a fourth or down a fifth for every chord change. All right, and I just played roots, and honestly, I've played that very line probably half the time we played that tune last night. So just playing the roots, you don't have to be very fancy. Your job is to have a good rhythmic feel and to play notes that define the chord, all right? Because your job is a supportive role. When there's a soloist playing, your job is to support, all right? So that's what you gotta play with a good rhythmic feel and play notes that define the chord. And number 3, and this is probably the most important thing. These first 3 things are what's happening in a nutshell, all right? And number 3 is the important thing. Listen, all right? Because that's what music is all about. It's sound, right? It's an oral thing, not O-R-A-L, but A-U-R-A-L. Is that right? Oral, what you hear, okay? So you have to listen too, because if you don't listen to what you're playing or what else is going on around you, you have less control over what they hear in the audience, all right? So what's going on the stage, you should have complete control of. All right, so you have to listen to what else is going on around you to make what you're playing work with everything else. For a jazz feel, which will only take up a couple of things here, the famous Ray Brown Skippity Boom triplet quarter note or 8th note triplet lick over the span of a quarter note is a great way to do that. Eighth notes or 8th note triplets on one of the quarter notes, but those have to be judiciously placed and used tastefully, and because you can overdo that kind of thing a lot. And it's the easiest way to disrupt the groove, which is what you don't want to have happen under any circumstance, right? So rhythmic variations on walking blues lines are interesting and can be very intensifying, but use them with caution, okay?
Brad Williams emphasizes the importance of a detailed understanding of each musical arrangement to a successful jazz piano performance.
The piano, specifically, in a big band, I have to be honest, always found it to be a very demoralizing situation to be the piano player in a big band. In terms of ego satisfaction, it's not very much there. And it still makes me feel, I still kind of laugh every time I go and play with a big band, because you're such window dressing kind of, you're like, you're sitting at this big wooden box on stage, and yet you're doing so little, normally within the course of things. So you can't even be heard. And that's what I like to start with is, what do you do in a big band? Well, this is another funny thing, is the way things have worked backwards. Originally, big bands were expanded small groups. And originally, small groups were extensions of solo piano, because solo piano was one of the first, or the real mainstays of jazz, in the development of jazz. And if you look at that discography sheet I gave you, there's some names on there, like Art Tatum, Teddy Wilson. Those are both on there, right? I think so. Who are people that could sit there and, what I just tried to do, they could do in their sleep, or if they were near death. That's about how they would sound. But what has happened is the big band has become the model now, and that's kind of out of the 40s. The big band took on a life of its own. And the piano became something of a artifact from the past that was just happened to be there still, or is used for certain color kind of things. Probably one of the things that's frustrating for you young players as you play with a big band is the realization that you're not being heard. That what you're doing doesn't seem to, if the band's playing all these big chords that are written, you can't be heard. And then all of a sudden they drop out, and there's nothing, and it's just you, and you're sitting there playing a chord, and then you're trying to match what the arranger has done in terms of interest, in terms of moving chords around, is a very, that's another tall order right there. It's a tall order for me. When all of a sudden there's no arrangement, and it's solo time, solo time. So one of the things that you have to learn, and there's several ways to learn this, is what you can do within the context of a big band to be heard. Now, one of the things I specifically try to do is I try not to play anything that can't be heard. And one of the ways I do that is by trying to get to know the arrangement or predict. I can kind of predict the way arrangements work because I've played so many of them now. But when the band is playing a lot, I'll just sit there, and make funny faces or whatever, You just sit there and wait. Now, when you start to hear rhythmic pattern, this is another thing of becoming more advanced rhythmically and getting to know things. When you hear like an arranger start a rhythmic pattern that has spaces in it, that's when you go into action. It's because those spaces are your palette. That's where you can be heard. And another thing to think about is on the piano. Last night we played a rehearsal with this huge, big faculty band with 6 trumpets. It's like Stan Kenton or something, very strong. It's a nice sounding band, but there was no amplification on the piano at all. It was absolutely hopeless for me to be heard if I was doing anything in the range where the band was playing. And that's the way it should be. That's the way it originally was. That's why, you see on all these charts you have these, written on your parts, these high octaves and stuff like that, or on the bassy things that, or sometimes they'll even write the voicing, like up in this area, you'll be going, that kind of thing up there. That's because that's well above where the band is typically playing. You have to realize this is a pretty high note on trumpet. And they're not going to be playing up there. So when you start, I'm playing the C 2 octaves above middle C. Okay? Now when trumpets start playing up there, that's like the climax of a tune, typically. Or necessarily when they get up there, that is the climax of the tune. So when you play up there in a normal part of the song, and that's one thing like Count Basie should do, never underestimate that Count Basie thing. I know I got sick to death of seeing it on charts year after year. Count Basie style, or Count Basie solo, or Count Basie fill, or Count Basie ending. Until you really listen to Count Basie, it doesn't make sense. But this guy could play. Everything he played totally made sense with what the band was playing. He was a connoisseur of space. And most of those things that are notated on the parts are things that he came up with himself over an arrangement, and they went back and wrote them in after he played the original arrangement. He wasn't told what to play. They didn't tell him to play Count Basie's stuff. It's mostly ear. That's really one of the trickiest parts about being a piano player, is mostly what you're doing is using your ear and your wits. You're either being witty or you're not. If you're not being witty, you shouldn't be playing at that time. You know what I mean? Play when you're witty. That's all centering on that a little bit. There's something about sitting and listening to an arrangement and hearing it the first time, particularly when you're the piano player. Listen to the horns, what the parts are doing, where the sections are. Make little plans about what you're planning to do through sections of the song. And they can be very simple. One of the biggest problems in big band is the piano player trying to be too complicated. And whenever I hear a recording of a big band and hear the pianist is like, he's trying to compete with the band. He's not playing with the band. He's trying to be hipper than the band, than the arrangement, you know, or he's trying to make it sound in a whole different way than it was intended. And it's not musical, really. Music is about cooperation, which goes back to the rhythm sections. You know, you really have to cooperate with your partners in the rhythm section. But you also have to cooperate with the band. You should think of yourself as writing your own part. Okay? And that's a great freedom to have. And in the hippest big bands, like Sun Ra or the early Basie band, before they had all this music written out, they did make up their parts. And you know, you would know if you made up a good part because someone would come up to you afterwards and say, in the band, they say, that was great, that thing you were doing there. And then all of a sudden, that was part of the arrangement. You never forgot it after someone complimented you on it. And, you know, in my opinion, I think that should be part of a big band approach, is letting the kids take their own initiative as far as change. I mean, all the kids, all the horn players and everything, do something where they have control. Because it's amazing in my big band, when I let them take over, all of a sudden, it's like they put on little uniforms or something. You know, there's like people in charge in the band, and things get much more efficient, and people are more alert, and they're feeling like they need to be paying attention to the overall situation. You know, delegate authority within the band. Try not to make it a tyranny. Another thing is to really think of the piano as a horn within a big band. Because there's so many chords written out, sometimes the thing is sitting there, as I said, like when you go into a solo section, and you know, the band's like, the piano's like, you know, all of a sudden it's like the piano player has to try to fill all the space that the big band was doing. So he's sitting there going, which sounds really goofy. Number one, it sounds really goofy, and also it sounds very heavy. It doesn't let things. Sometimes when a big band stops doing a tutti section like that, things should just open up. And part of that opening up should be the piano player just going, "Oh yeah." And then the bass player goes. You know, so you don't come into like the third bar of the solo section. Because the soloist is coming in. It's his time. It's not your time. You know, you're supposed to make him sound good. You're not just supposed to sit there and crank out chords because you're afraid that the whole thing will fall apart or you'll lose your place. You have to learn to keep your place in your mind, that's a big thing too. And I've talked about some of the bass players here too, is the thing of looking ahead, spending your time knowing where you're at, getting ready to play at a certain place, playing there, knowing where you're at, looking ahead, playing in the next place, you know, constantly staying on top of the situation. That takes a lot of experience. You have to do it a lot to really get proficient at it.
Let's listen as Ron Keyser discusses the basic jazz beat, fills, and solos for the drummer.
And it's really very simple, basic jazz beat. It doesn't even involve feet, or more than one foot. Hi-hat on 2 and 4, right? And then this beat, right, which you've all heard, and I'm sure you all can do. But some of the kids can't do it very well, and of course they can't do it at fast tempos. They get ting, 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 right? Quarter, eighth, eighth, quarter, eighth, eighth, instead of the dotted eighth. So I work with kids a lot on this beat. So this is really the foundation of most jazz, right? And at various beats, and at various tempos, and various dynamics. A lot you can do with it, right? But it has to be very clean. Part of the problem usually comes over here in the hi-hat. The kids don't know how to work the hi-hat very well because in rock you don't use it. They don't open it up enough, so they can't play very loud. See how little that is? You've got to open that opening at least an inch or maybe more. Okay, the kids now have progressed, let's say, to the 9th grade. They can handle basic beats fairly well. Their time is pretty good. They're doing a pretty good job for you in your middle school jazz ensemble. Well, one thing they're having trouble with is fills. And the word fill appears in the music. They don't know if they should ask their friend named Phil to play or what they should do exactly. They sometimes panic. Basically a fill is just a little solo, that's all. Some people call these setups, fills, different words. Now the first one is a very technical fill. It's called the whack fill, right? And you can do it a variety of ways. Hit another stick together, like that, or you can do it with that drum or bass drum or whatever you want. But it's just a one-note fill. And for most of the time, I just do it on the snare drum, like a rim shot. And then when the band comes in, I use the right side of my body, the bass drum and the cymbal, to play the band figure. 1, 2, 3, 4. Very simple, but very effective. Just a one-note fill. Now the problem is coming out of the fill. Many times the kids get the hi-hat mixed up. Instead of 2 and 4, it's all of a sudden 1 and 3, right? So, da, 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 da. Sometimes I cut the hi-hat out a little bit early so that there's no chance of it getting mixed up. Da, 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 da. The next one is another scientific name called the pa-boom fill, right? And that pa-boom is 2 whacks, right? Or you can say whack whack, but pa-boom seems to work better. Two rim shots, or just 2 whacks on the snare drum, whatever, right? Third one is the padiddly bump fill, right? And the padiddly bump fill is what you heard. I won't be able to use this much longer because it's what they used to do on the Tonight Show. Every night, padiddly bump, da 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 da. Johnny, here comes Johnny. Padiddly bump, da 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 da. The band has the figure pa da 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 da, and it's triplet on 4 with the proceeded on hand 3. Of the problems in band. Look,
Your solo should be musical just like anything else. First of all, it has to have a form to it. 12 measures. If you're doing a blues, the solo should be a 12-bar blues. So drummers should, number one, sing the melody to help them with their form. Drummers have to memorize melody. They have to know the tunes. They may not know the changes, they may not even know how the tune looks on paper, but they have to, by rote, know that tune in their head. So that when they're playing a solo, they can sing that tune in their head and come out right with the form. Okay? Number two, their solo should match the style. If they're playing a bossa nova, they should play a Latin type solo rather than plain old, same old rock solo that they know. Right? If they're playing an up-tempo swing tune, then certain licks work better for up-tempo swing, and if they're playing a rock tune, then they can go back to their rock solo. But there is a difference in the styles.